It's Cosmo Solutions 8, and in this video I want to show you how to use a wildly underutilized feature inside of Google Ads, drafts and campaigns. Technically two features, but they tie in hand. I'll show you how. Just a quick note is I don't think this is for newbies per se. I think that this is more if you have a tenured campaign and you want to begin testing some variables. From campaign setting against campaign setting. So if you're looking to test like ad copy, I actually don't think this is the best option, and I realize some people might yell at me, and maybe you know more than I do about it, but I think you can you can split test things like ad copy within a campaign. But if you're looking to split test campaign settings, that's where I feel drafts and experiments tend to go. Well, that's where experiments really begins to become valuable. Drafts is helpful if you just want to make changes to a campaign, but you want to do it inside of a sandbox. And that's a good way to think about it, by the way. So drafts is like a really friendly sandbox. You take an existing campaign, you clone it into a draft, basically. Now you have all of the exact same campaign settings, and you get to kind of tinker without messing up your original campaign, which is cool. And then when you're done tinkering, you can push those changes back into your original campaign. That's the use case for why you wouldn't just clone a campaign. The drafts allow you to kind of open up a sandbox. Think about it, if you've ever built a website or a piece of software, it's like a development environment. You push the campaign into a development environment, make all the changes that you want to make. Get approval if you need to get approval from the client or your boss or whoever, and then once they approve it, you can take that draft and you have two options. We can either go back into the original campaign, or you can push it into an experiment. I'd caution you against going back into the original campaign unless you really know what you're doing. If you're not entirely sure how this is going to end up, then it might be really worth pushing into an experiment, which, by the way, is why I say it's wildly underutilized. It's actually really cool that Google allows us to do this. It's kind of like a sort of more myopic specific form of split testing that they provide us. So you could always copy campaigns and run campaign against campaign, but it's sort of interesting to do it inside of Google's this ecosystem, this provision that they've given us. So let me show you what I mean. I feel like I'm talking too much now. Just like the sound of my own voice. So inside of Google Ads, I'm in all campaigns. You're going to scroll down here and say drafts and experiments. Now I'm going to go to experiments first to show you why you can't go to experiments first. Because if I click on experiments and then I say new experiment, it's going to say you don't have any drafts. So experiments draw from drafts, and unless you have a draft created, you can't create an experiment. So that's just a really good note for you to know, which is you have to create the draft first, and then from the draft you can push that into an experiment. So we're going to select campaign drafts here. I'll say new draft, and I'm just going to let me back up before I name it. You have to select the campaign, obviously, that you're cloning. So I'm going to select the campaign here. The only campaigns that are applicable at the moment are search and display campaigns. So I'm going to choose my general campaign. We're just going to call this test because I'm lazy with nomenclature. Although, to that point, make sure that when you're naming your campaign, give yourself the flexibility of understanding what it is that you're looking at. And I think the best thing to do that is name it with the test, meaning what you're going to do. So let's say that you're testing bid strategies. Then this could be test target CPA, for instance. So I know I'm using manual CPC with enhanced enabled, so I'm testing manual against target CPA. Now I can just at a glance say like, okay, I know which one of these is functioning. And the description I think is probably more helpful if there are other people involved. So now you'll notice that I get the exact same campaign, but it's in this draft. And it's all the stuff that you would expect to have with a few exceptions, and Google outlines what those are actually. So here are the features that aren't available for drafts, but it's not anything to worry about really because all of these become available the minute the draft gets turned into a campaign. So it's not a catastrophic error at all, but if you do notice that a few of the things that you're used to seeing are missing, it's because the campaign's in draft. And when you take a look at why some of these are missing, it makes a ton of sense. Like, some of them just aren't going to be applicable to a draft campaign the way they'd be applicable to a live campaign. But you have the opportunity to make all the changes that you want to make. And this is where I would caution you. I can't think of a use case where I would want to split test the ads in this particular context. I feel like you want to use the drafts in the experiment. Now, if you're using drafts just to make campaign changes, go wild. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to assume that you're using drafts to then push into an experiment. I think more often than not, it's just better to split test ads inside of the same campaign. And the reason I say that is because Google algorithmically, let me get big again because I'm going to talk for a minute. Google does a really good job at split testing ads based off of the user. And so the Google ads aren't split tested in a true, like A/B split test environment where you get an ad, you get an ad, you get an ad, you get an ad. Instead, Google's doing, in as much as we can tell, and some of this is conjecture, but I can support it with quite a bit of data, Google's connecting ads to prospects based off of what Google knows is going to appeal to that prospect the most, and then using the bulk of the traffic that you're receiving in order to optimize your ads. That's why you'll notice that ads optimize very quickly. And sometimes it's a little frustrating too, because you're going to have your darlings. You write a bunch of ads, create a bunch of ad copy, and then all of a sudden the ad that you really like isn't getting any play, and then there's this other kind of generic ad over here that's shooting through the roof. And it's tempting to say, hey Google, let's, instead of optimize for best performing ad, rotate indefinitely, which is a stupid thing to do. So I like relying on Google's machine learning when I know that it functions well. In this particular instance, if you were to try to split test ads, what you're doing is you're moving your ad copy into a true split test. And the problem with that is Google's already kind of beat that paradigm. So, it doesn't make sense to you're going backwards in time. So just get really clear on the things that you are split testing. I think that's going to be really important. But just know that you have the opportunity to, make all the campaign changes that you'd want to make inside of this test campaign. And you're in pretty good shape in terms of, having fun, because this isn't running. It's a draft. The thing that I'd like to point out to you, and the thing that I think is probably the more likely test, is inside of settings we're gonna test our bidding. Now you can test some other things too, and I'll give you one example. Actually, as I was preparing for this video, something that I thought of is we don't have a goal selected, and that's because this campaign was built back in the day when we didn't want to use goal guidance, and there was a reason for that, by the way. Goal guidance was it was very restrictive. It took away features and functionality. But what we have noticed recently, and this was like Q4 of 2020, is selecting goal guidance actually began to improve the efficacy of the campaign and helped Google drive to the goal. And you'll notice that goal guidance, and this might not chronologically be correct, but I think goal guidance happened first, and then they started to, you saw this whole new set of naming conventions in the conversion actions. And so I think what's happening is Google's saying, hey, tell us what you want people to do. And then when you set up your conversion actions, it's like, hey, tell us what it is that they did. And then they're able to connect those dots really well. So an idea that occurred to me right before I shot this video is, gosh, I wonder if taking a campaign that was built without goal guidance and then applying a goal, I wonder what that would do. And so this would be a really cool opportunity for me to say, you know what, this client wants leads, so I'm going to select leads. Let me move my face. And now I've built a campaign with goal guidance. I've never done this before, full disclosure. It's just, but again, I think it's a perfect use case as to why you'd want to use an experiment, because I get to build the draft and then run an experiment and see the two side by side. Now, best practice time. Only test one variable at a time. And it's not because Google can't handle it. Google can handle quite a bit. It's because we can't handle it. And if let's say that I'm testing two variables, okay, so let's say I change the goal and I change my bid structure. Well, now I don't know what worked, which of those changes actually had the impact. Was it, one, the other, a combination of both, and in what percentages? So if I don't want to split test goal guidance, and in this particular instance I think I'm going to split test my bid strategy, then make sure that you're only testing one variable at a time, and that's critically important too. It's kind of like, it's sort of exciting to be like, oh, I'm going to test all the things. And you can do that, but just make sure that you're giving yourself, it's one experiment per variable. And then the other thing too is remember that all the rules still apply. So for instance, we're running manual CPC with enhanced enabled, and that has a lot to do with the strategy of this particular campaign, but that's, I was about to say if you know what you're doing, which isn't true anymore because Google Smart Bidding is working so well now. I don't want to be too aggressive in how I make recommendations here, but let's say that whatever bid strategy you're using, you want to test against another strategy. So I'm going to swap over from manual CPC to enhanced enabled. Oh, here's what I was saying: is oftentimes when we're running manual CPC, we don't have enhanced enabled yet, because we want to figure out what the ecosystem looks like before we go, say, hey Google, go ahead and spend 250% or more on a particular click. And I don't know that I'd want to run an experiment during that kind of incubated period. So then I enable enhanced CPC. Okay, so I've got manual CPC enabled, or manual CPC on, but enhanced is not enabled, and I want to run through the incubated period. So I'm trying to figure out what the lay of the land looks like, what my average CPC is going to be before I let Google run off algorithmically on run amok. And then I enable enhanced CPC. Bam. I don't want to start running an experiment right then and there because I actually, enhanced CPC was enabled, but on the timeline that is my campaign, I don't know what that means. I don't know what's happened. So you want to make sure that you have an adequate amount of data before you run off experimenting with other things. Now, you could run an experiment in conjunction and then run these two against each other, but I wouldn't want to do that because I'd actually want to see whether or not an experiment is even worth it. If my campaign takes off, I don't want to go fix a good thing. I just really hurt my elbow. Manual CPC. So let's say that I said we're going to test target CPA. So let's say that we're testing target CPA, and normally Google gives me a number here. What's going on, Google? And I just threw that in there. I don't know what it's going to actually be. The other piece here is, remember, the rules apply. So with target CPA, it usually takes, depending on the campaign spend, for this particular campaign, I would guess at like 3 to 4 weeks for target CPA to really, tenure to optimize. And that's where this experiments things could fly off the rails a little bit, because now you're running two campaigns against each other, but campaign A you've already known is performing, and now campaign B is an alternative bid strategy that takes 4 weeks generally to begin showing signs of life, let's say. And in a normal silo, you would give that campaign 4 weeks before you begin to really evaluate the performance of the campaign. Well, you want to do the same thing here. So if you're running an experiment and it's going to take 4 weeks for target CPA in order to to properly optimize, you don't want to get to the end of 4 weeks and say who won. Instead, 4 weeks is really kind of when you start to pay attention, right? That's when you're comparing apples to apples. And you also want to make sure that in your date ranges in the comparison that you're cutting off the first, and it doesn't necessarily always need to be 4 weeks, but you're cutting off the learning period. And Google Smart Bidding always has learning periods. Sometimes it's shorter than others. Maximize Conversions tends to work very quickly. Well, work is a variable there. That's another thing to note here is you want to test, of course, the data-driven truths, but you also want to test the anecdotal truths. And here's what I mean by that is, let's say I'm running manual CPC with enhanced enabled and maximize conversions against each other. And they're both, properly tenured, and I have a good timeline. My expectation would be that maximize conversions gets me more leads. So if I'm just looking at conversions or conversion value or whatever, then maximize conversions in a silo sterilized is going to look like it won. But my experience over the long term has also been that maximize conversions tend to dilute lead quality, because it's like, give me the most amount of people you can for this amount of money. And so, really pay attention to what it is that you're testing in your experimentation, because you could end up kind of doing yourself a disservice. And it's not anything that you wouldn't already know from, other campaign experience. So just, all I'm saying really is don't ignore the rules that we've already established. Those are all still rules. The experiment just lets you kind of, test those against each other in the ecosystem. Let me check my notes. Yeah, I said factor in timeline. Cool. So let me show you how to run the experiment now. Have I built the draft? I have, kind of. All right, so we're going to test target CPA. I made up a number. And now, when I go back to all campaigns and I go to my drafts and experiments, you can see the drafts here. And by the way, if you're annoyed at the fact that I always go back to the root navigation, that's for people that are relatively new and they don't necessarily know how to get back to where it is that they're going. Now, real quick note is this is accessible to you in your sort of core navigation here. And make sure that if you're messing around with your drafts, that you're in the draft. I have made the mistake of creating a draft, navigating away, going out, going to the bathroom, coming back, and then all of a sudden I'm back in my core campaign and I thought it was my draft, and then it's, just sadness and tears. So let's say that I want to turn my draft into an experiment. Now I go to campaign experiments, and I select new experiment, and then I select the draft. I have a draft now. That's awesome. Good for me. Name the experiment, and realize that the name of the experiment doesn't have to be the name of the draft. In this case, we'll just do that. Description is optional. Now, this is kind of cool. Google allows you to offer up a start date. And the reason I like this is because, and this client is a really good example. You'll have clients or campaigns that are cyclical, or there's ebbs and flows to the traffic, or you're working on a Thursday, but that there's always the big lull over the weekend and it spikes on Monday or whatever. So this gives you the opportunity to kind of begin your test. Put your best possible foot forward, which may be more or less applicable depending on what it is that you're testing. So we can have a start and an end date, or we can run it indefinitely. Be careful about running it indefinitely, because you may forget. So if you run it indefinitely, set a task or a notification for yourself to back out and come in and check in on your experiment. Otherwise, it's just going to go. Now, the experiment split, again, if you're a smarter human than I am and you know why, like what use case exists where you wouldn't run this 50-50, let me know. The problem is if you don't run it 50-50, I don't think that it's as easy as saying like, oh, let's send 25% to this experiment and 75% to the core campaign, and then all I will do is I'll factor that in. You know, I'll build macros in Excel and then, you know, take all my conversion values and then adjust them. You know, that kind of gerrymandering I don't think works because I don't think traffic works that way. I think the way that, you know, you have ebbs and flows and spikes and peaks and valleys and those things, and you want as much of a 50-50 split as you can. And so I don't know why you wouldn't say 50%. But if you do, or if you've run experiments and you haven't done 50%, I'd actually be really interested in that use case and the learning opportunity for me. But outside of that, if you're brand new to this, in my mind, 50% split is the best practice. This is interesting. Search-based and cookie-based. Search-based basically means that we're going to be solution agnostic in terms of how, you know, for people that are searching. So if the same person searches multiple times, they'll see, you know, main campaign, experiment campaign, main campaign, experiment campaign, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So every search is a new possible test. Cookie-based, which Google says, is it in the pop-up? Yep, may give you more accurate data. So Google says that cookie-based data is more reliable. I'm sure they're correct. What this means is they're delivering the split test based off of who has been cookied. So if you see the core campaign or the main campaign once, then you're always going to see that. And if you see the experiment once, you're always going to see that experiment. Number one, I'm really interested in how this changes based off of all of the new anti-cookie internet legislation that's going on. So we're basically killing cookies. Apple did it almost wholesale, and you know, it's the reason that the new Google Analytics rolled out. So it's I anticipate this changing just a little bit, and I would also say I'm going to tell you to keep it search based unless you have a, you know, crazy budget. So if you got a nice big healthy budget and you can afford to run cookie based, then great, go for the clean data. But you know, this particular campaign, I don't think they spend $1,000 a month. It's like a small campaign, and so I'm going to go search based because I don't have the time to allow Google to cookie everybody. A, B, they don't have a ton of redundant traffic, and so, you know, that's a use case that you get to decide for yourself. So we're going to say search based here. I'm going to click save, and now I've got my experiment, which is super cool. And this is supposed to light up, and it's not lit up for me yet, and I wonder if that's just because it's going to take some time. Let me refresh. All right, while I'm waiting for it to light up, I want to go over and just read through some of the documentation for you, or with you. Now, one note, and something that's actually served me so well, is read Google's help notes. If you're ever learning something or trying to figure something out, like, they do a really good job. You know, they have like these use cases here, and there's actually stuff, I've used drafts and experiments before, but there's stuff that I didn't know about drafts and experiments that I learned in reading this document in preparation for this video. Namely, the fact that I didn't know drafts and experiments were only for search and display campaigns. I've only ever used them for search campaigns, but, you know, I would have assumed that you could use them for just about anything. But I'm going to include a link to this in the description of the video, and there's really nothing that I haven't already said. You can only run one draft as an experiment at a time, which I guess it's important for you to know. We talked about the features that aren't available. And then there's features that aren't supported by experiments, but I've never run a hotel campaign, so I don't know really whether or not this is super critical or crucial. Let's go back and see if our experiments are up. Bam! Okay, so this is what you're looking for. And as you can see, if for whatever reason it just took a minute, and I don't know why that is, Google, speed your stuff up. So if you click on your experiment, then you'll notice that you get this little beaker, which is really helpful, because if you're looking at your global view, it's really nice to be able to say, you know, like, oh, I've got an experiment running, and there it is. Let me pause this real quick so I'm not actually running in this client's account, because that would be embarrassing. Is it paused? You can't modify the status dates, budgets, or name an experiment campaign. Interesting. That makes perfect sense. So it's not going to let me pause from the campaign view because I'm running an experiment. The experiment has predefined date range. Cool. I didn't know that, so I just learned something on this video. But all campaigns, drafts, and experiments, and then from campaign experiments, select the experiment. And what's cool is this gives you the global view of everything. So here's your performance comparison, and we can see that it's going to start tomorrow. so I'm safe, incidentally, from this client. And you know, what's also kind of cool is you get to slice and dice the way that you want to. But remember what I said earlier about, you know, tracking the data-driven truths, but also some of the anecdotal truths that are going to be applicable. And then we can see the, you know, on a per ad group level, what's possibly functioning, what's not. So anyway, really cool feature from Google. Like most features from Google, obviously I drank the Kool-Aid so long ago, it's not even worth denying. But I hope this was helpful. I hope you're going to use it and try it and test it. If you have any questions, hit me in the comments. If you have any ideas, any things that I haven't thought of, by the way, because I'm not like a drafts and experiments expert or anything. To be honest with you, the only thing we've ever used it for is to test bid strategies, which is what I just taught you. So if there's other things that we can use it for that I'm not thinking of because I'm not smart enough or creative enough, then I'd love for you to tell me. I'd be really interested in your ideas there. Thumbs up if you liked the video. Big thank you to everybody that's been subscribing. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and when we get to 1,000, we're going to start going live. And I'm going to start doing things like, I saw my buddy Uzair, big shout out to Uzair, by the way, he's like my YouTube mentor. He also does Google Ads trading too, so if you're into Google Ads, go check out Uzair. You'll find him, it's SF Digital, Sam Frank Digital. And Uzair had this live video where he goes, I'm going to write your ad copy for you for free, live. And I was like, oh, I'm going to steal that because that's brilliant. So if you subscribe, you get me closer to 1,000 people. Once I'm at 1,000 people, YouTube trusts me enough to start going live, and then I can do stuff like write your ad copy for you, or critique landing pages, or sing songs. I could probably do that now recorded, but it wouldn't be real. It wouldn't be as organic. So anyway, thumbs up, comment, subscribe. Really appreciate you and your attention and the opportunity to learn and grow with you. So thanks for watching. That's enough for that. I'm done. We'll talk to y'all later.